Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC joining us to talk Week 8 of ACC play minus Clemson and NC State. And we finally arrive at Georgia Tech and Wake. The Yellow Jackets, one of the better 3-2 teams in the country, lost an inexplicable Labor Day night game to Tennessee in which they dominated most of the way, racked up 530 some odd yards of rushing offense, but fumbled in inopportune times, including salting the game away with what should have been a 2-touchdown lead, but Taquan Marshall fumbling in Tennessee territory inside the 5-yard line. They lose that game in overtime, double or triple overtime. And then this past week, 2-score lead in the fourth quarter against Miami. Georgia Tech fans have to be sick about not being 5-0 right now. Wake 1-2 in the conference. They had the 3 softies out of conference. They're 4-2 overall. They've got it lined up to possibly to get to another bowl game. They did have the loss a couple weeks ago to Florida State at home in the last 50 seconds. Should be a competitive game. Clearly, Georgia Tech's to date the better team and a substantial favorite against Wake.
Yeah, this, at worst, Georgia Tech should be 4-1, right? I mean, the Tennessee game, as bad as Tennessee is, I think you kind of write it off because it is the opener and anything can happen. That Miami game last week was completely inexplicable how it went down in the fourth quarter. I mean, Miami was really trailing that entire game, and they just found a way to steal it. Wake Forest has been pretty good. I mean, this is a program that, if they have John Wolford a couple weeks ago, they probably win that game they played. They had Kendall Hinton in, and it didn't go great. Wolford has played well when he's been in. I'm not saying they beat Clemson, but I think they make it more competitive. The final score was 28-14, but when you look at that game, it really was 28-0 with 9 minutes left, and Wake Forest scored a couple cheap touchdowns at the end. It was really not as close as it could have been, I think, if John Wolford had played. So Clemson was treading on thin ice for a while there, as you could tell. That Wake game, coming off that Virginia Tech win, it's easy to kind of go to sleep there, and then having the game on a short week with Kelly Bryant being hurt. So Clemson was kind of asking for it. I think Wake would have given them a little bit more of a run if Wolford was playing. Now, Wake Forest is coming off of a bye week. John Wolford's healthy. I like what Kendall Hinton brings to the table from a running perspective, but Wolford has been every bit as good. Plus, he's been throwing the ball really well this year. Wake Forest defense has been pretty strong, but they haven't seen an offense like Georgia Tech's as far as the running game is concerned. I think probably the closest that they've seen to it is Clemson, and Clemson hasn't even really been as consistent as Georgia Tech has been on the ground this year. So I think from a consistency standpoint, this is the best offense that Wake Forest has played against. Georgia Tech's defense steadily improving. As long as they don't go into prevent defense mode like they did last week on the final drive against Miami, if this thing's close in the fourth quarter, I think they should beat Wake Forest. It's a homecoming game for Georgia Tech there in Atlanta. They're the more talented team. I think coaching's a wash at this point because I think Dave Clawson's done a fantastic job with that Wake Forest football program. I think Wake Forest likely makes a bowl game this year still, but this is one of those games that is going to be tough for them to win. Georgia Tech is angry. They feel that they should have won last week. Obviously, they've still got feelings about that game, and they're going to be riled up and ready to go. I think it's a really tough spot for Wake Forest, even coming off of a bye week. Just seeing how Georgia Tech lost last week and how they're going to come out and play inspired football, in my opinion, I don't think this is a situation where Georgia Tech's just now going to roll over. But I think Georgia Tech plays well enough to win this football game. But I think it'll be close. I mean, I think Wake Forest will keep it close up until the fourth quarter, but I think Georgia Tech will score a touchdown or two late that maybe makes this a double-digit spread. But, give me Georgia Tech to win this game. They're at home. I'll take them in Atlanta, but I like Wake Forest to make this competitive because this is a good football team that, a lot of people still aren't talking about.
Wake coming off the bye week. Ted Roof on the Georgia Tech side taking some heat for the collapse against Miami in the fourth quarter, and in particular, that final drive and the prevent defense. Antonio Simmons, a guy, if you love the defensive football, to look out for on the Yellow Jacket side. He's got 4.5 sacks and 5.5 tackles for loss, one of the better defensive weapons in the ACC. Greg Dortch, finally a go-to guy, a guy other than the tight end in recent years, Cam Serenay, at the wide receiver position, who is a bit of a threat for the Demon Deacons. He's got 35 receptions for 400-plus yards and 5 touchdowns. Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC helping us break down the conference for Week 8. Clemson and North Carolina State on the shelf, but a number of interesting matchups, not necessarily marquee games, especially with Louisville and Florida State down, but a number of games. And you can guess that with about 6 or 7 games on the docket, maybe we get one upset that turns our thinking around in terms of who could possibly challenge Miami, Virginia Tech in the Coastal Division, and of course, Clemson, NC State in the Atlantic. Mike, we appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mark.